Hi, this is Micah Clark. I'm the director of the American Family Association of Indiana. And today I'm interviewing a longtime friend of mine who I've known for many years in the pro family movement. His name is David Lance. He's an author, a speaker, and a teacher. And today we're going to interview David about one of his most recent books called The Unraveling of We the People. It touches on a topic that we've dealt with a lot the last couple of years in the Indiana General Assembly regarding civics education. And many of us remember as young people studying civics in elementary school and junior high and in government classes. So we're going to talk about how that has changed. But first, let's talk about why, David. Welcome, first of all, amid this COVID crisis, where that's where we're all learning Zoom together.
Isn't this the new normal or
It
what?
is, yes. I'm getting a little tired of quarantine. I think I'm getting a little tired of Zoom, but it's a great functional tool. I know lots of people are using it, and I appreciate those joining us today. But David, why did you write the book We the People? What was the background of this?
Well, I'll answer that question in just a second, but I want
Sure.
you to know that, and your listeners as well, that if you're not plugged into Micah Clark's Facebook page, he has the greatest memes in the world. And my wife now even watches your things. I have to say that I shared with her something that you posted, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. And basically it has Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the sun and the mun and the twos and the when is blocked out, and it's just day, 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 day. And that seems to be the way everything goes. What day is it? I have no idea.
Yeah, I had a Bible study last week, and on a Saturday morning, and we're doing it by Zoom, and I missed it because I didn't realize it was Saturday, and because every day feels like Saturday, so they all run
Absolutely.
together. But I appreciate you being able to join us, and
Well, thank
yeah,
you.
it's different times, and you know we've got, and maybe we could touch on this at some point. But as an economist, because I know you teach economics classes, there's a lot to be concerned about uh, several months from now of how our economy
Yes.
recovers from this virus.
Well, maybe we can touch on that in a future
Yeah,
conversation. But you'd asked about why I wrote the book. Well, at one point I was working on an essay for the American Enterprise Institute. They have a values and capitalism group. And so they invite essays to be written every year on a given topic. I submitted mine. It didn't get selected. I didn't expect it to, but I got really interested in this topic that I called The Unraveling. And so I turned it into a book out of that. And many people listening or watching today know that America was founded on the twin ideas of individual liberty and limited government. But as time has gone by, it seems like the culture that we grew up in, and I'm talking about the baby boom generation, it seems that that culture is unraveling. And we've heard about the fiscal cliff, where we're basically now 22 plus several trillion dollars in debt. But we're also facing what I call a moral cliff, where we have no sense of who we are as a country and as a people. And as I thought about it, I thought back to a conversation I had with my daughter Sarah back when she was when she was a junior in high school, and she had asked me at one point in time. She says, "Dad, it says in our money, in God we trust. So why don't we?" And so one of the things that I think about, therefore, is this book, The Unraveling of We the People, is really designed to help answer that question that my daughter asked me all those years ago.
so in your book, you say that we've lost a sense of what unites us. And I think it's interesting that in the midst of this COVID crisis that America still seems pretty divided between left and right. And a lot of that probably depends on a person's worldview, maybe their view of our founding. Tell us about that, where you feel like we don't have quite what we used to have,
Mm-hmm.
say 20, 30 years ago, or 40 years ago when you and I were in school and kids. And there seemed to be a sense of commonality on certain things. And there seems to be very little of that today on almost anything.
Yes. Well, the way I describe it, and actually there's been several books that have been written that get to this topic. And when I teach political science, and it's Introduction to American Government, and the first day of every semester, when I start the class, I ask my students to talk to me about what they understand the idea of a country that's filled with a bunch of tribes is like. And what I get them to see is just like a high school might have its sports mascot, and we're all for our team, but we're against the rival team and so forth. In America, we seem to have divided into a bunch of tribes. And so the idea once upon a time of a melting pot where everybody, diverse natures are blended together like in a mixer, and you can't tell the difference between the individual parts when they got dumped in. Now it's like a salad bowl. And so we've got croutons, we've got tomatoes, we've got onions, we've got lettuce, we've got radishes. And if you don't like one of those, you just take them out. You discriminate against the radishes if you don't like radishes. You discriminate against the onions if you don't like the onions. And so what I think is going on here is that as we think about the unraveling of we the people, is that we have lost a commonality of what used to hold us apart, together. Once upon a time, we celebrated things like Thanksgiving, and we celebrated Christmas and so forth. And now, if you think of a couple of years ago, after the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl, their people in Philadelphia went into the streets and rioted. And so I think what's going on is that we have gotten away from this concept of a common sense of moral principles that holds us together, that shapes the national policy that we follow.
You know, David, I saw a cartoon years ago. You'll remember the old Calvin and Hobbes cartoons probably. And
Mm-hmm.
Calvin's talking to his dad, and his dad says something about being a melting pot. And Calvin says, "I think we're stir fried now." And that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I wonder. I know this isn't really in your notes, but have we lost the sense that we used to have when someone came to America? We assimilated to certain things, and now we don't ask people to assimilate to those things, even though I know it's not all about immigration. But even in immigration policy, when someone comes here legally, there's a test they take, there's values that they embrace, there's a pledge they take. But I don't know if the general population understands that or embraces it like we used to.
I mentioned that when I teach, there's a particular course I teach on state and local politics. It's totally online, and so when I get to a certain point in the course, I mention to them this exact same test that you're mentioning, that people that are coming to the country that want to become citizens legally have to pass. And I ask my students, I say, do you think that this would be something that would be good for all Americans to take? Because these students, and these are adult learners, these are not high school students. The adult learners basically say, man, I wish I'd studied this more when I was in school and so forth. And they agree that it would be helpful to all Americans if they had to pass the same test that people coming to the country and wanting to become citizens legally have to pass. And I feel that we as Americans, we take for granted so much of what we have. When I talk to people who have come from Nigeria or China, people who are students in my courses, say at Ivy Tech Community College, for example, and have gone through the process of becoming citizens, they greatly value this. And I've had students from Venezuela. And when we get to talking about the economy of Venezuela and how socialism has impacted them, they are right there with me. And I love their sharing of their stories of what's going on in that country.
Tell us a little bit about civics education and how it's changed.
Well, I've got on my screen here, this is a quote from George Washington in his inaugural address, in where he's talking about how I behold the surest pledges that the foundations of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality. And so if you think back to Washington and his ideas of a reference point, certainly with regard to civics education, today we think about learning how a bill becomes a law, and how government functions. We also, if you get into it more, then you want to learn about the founding philosophies of the country. What were the founding fathers like? What ideas motivated them. But a third element of traditional civics was how to behave correctly, how to integrate morally and within civil society. And that means applying moral teachings, which can come from, among other things, the Bible. And we've gotten away from that. In fact, there's a researcher by the name of Charles Murray. He wrote a book called Coming Apart. And in his book, he talks about what he calls the four founding virtues of American culture: honesty, industriousness, marriage, and religion. And because we don't teach those things anymore, he basically says America is coming apart, that these things that we value that hold our civilization together are unraveling. And so when you think about what should be taught in civics education, it's not simply the process of how a bill becomes a law, who is your state or federal representative, can you name the members of the Supreme Court? It's much more than that. It's how do we understand how we all work together to create we the people of these United States of America.
David, what you're talking about here reminds me a little bit of what I know when I was in elementary school, and probably you too. We used to have a citizenship grade.
Mm-hmm.
Where we were, and it was things like honesty, um, uh, manners,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And there was
You
actually
get
good.
along with other students.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
And it seems like we've lost that as well. I know that's something that we forget that Washington was referring to, is if we don't have a common morality of decency, these things fall apart.
Absolutely.
Um, so tell us about the civics issue and how it's changed, because I know in reading your book, when you and I talk about civics, and as people are listening now, they're probably remembering what they learned in school, but that may have been, like I said, 20, 30 years ago, depending on the age of the audience listening today.
Yes.
How is it different than it used to be?
Well, and this is something that perhaps if we have some other conversations, we can get into in greater depth. But I wanted to put up on the screen, these are these three concepts of what have traditionally been understood as civics. But as I was writing my book, I was talking to a professor, Dr. David Randall, with the National Academy of Scholars. And what he made me aware of is that among the progressive left that have basically burrowed into the fabric of our academic colleges and universities, they are teaching something that we would not recognize as civics. And so the poster child that I think of as of the progressive side is a guy by the name of Bill Ayers. Now, I'm 63 and Bill Ayers is now today probably 70, 71 years of age. So he and I are both boomer members of the boomer generation, but he's in the older half of the boomer generation. I'm in the younger half. He would have been attending Woodstock in 1969. I was probably in like 7th grade in 1969, and I would not have gone to Woodstock. And but out of that, he joined the Weatherman Underground. Basically, was involved in what some believe were some murders of police officers in Chicago. And yet now today, he is the senior scholar in residence at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And he's written a lot of curriculum on civics. But his understanding of civics is teaching people how to revolt against the government. And some of these students get funded by George Soros and things of that nature. And so that's one of the key things that has changed. Now, perhaps in another conversation when we have time, I can talk about the progressive movement and people like John Dewey who wanted to reform society. But let me just simply say that Bill Ayers and others like him that came out of the 60s movement are basically promoting those ideas. And so the three concepts that I try to talk about in the book is that first, there was a concerted effort beginning in the 1920s to remove moral teachings from public education, including Christianity. That would have been through things like the McGuffey Readers. Second, the 60s generation that grew up, Bill Ayers being an example of that, despised Christianity and proclaimed sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so they come along with that philosophy. And now they're no longer teenagers or people in their young 20s. They are running the fabric of American society. And so they have now moved into positions of prominence to promote what this David Randall with the National Academy of Scholars refers to as the new civics, that undermines our traditional form of constitutional government and in fact wants to tear that apart and put in more of a socialist slash communist style of government that you see being advocated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, and much of the liberal left.
One of the problems I have with the liberal left, and it fits into this, is that they tend to focus on everything that's bad about America. But civics education was all the things that were good about America that unite us. We've always had, you know, imperfections in America. Now they pale in comparison to a lot of other nations because of our founding. But is this a part of their mindset that they can't see the good in America? They only see the bad?
You know, I think that that's very true, but I want to phrase this in a different way. As you know, I write a newsletter called Conversations with the Culture, where I take movies and then I do a Bible study sort of a thing. And I've also recently started doing podcasts on that. So it's an audio podcast where I reflect on what's going on in the news media. And most recently, I used Toy Story 4. Where the idea is that Buzz is trying to figure out this thing that Woody refers to as a conscience, and letting your conscience be your guide, as Jiminy Cricket would have said from Pinocchio years ago, which frankly the Generation Z have not watched. They do not know what Pinocchio is all about. But in that, I talk about how, as you watch people talking to President Trump, as President Trump, especially back in March, was trying to provide some sense of hope in his press conferences, you had reporters, one particular guy from NBC, I don't remember his name, but he says, you know, why are you trying to present this idea of hope? You know, you just seem to focus on that, Mr. President. And so I think the liberal left, more so than wanting to tear down things, just can't see the positive things, have difficulty seeing hope. And so to answer your question, Mike, I think the reason for this, and the political studies bear this out, more and more you see Christians gravitating to the Republican Party and non-Christians gravitating to the Democrat Party. In fact, there's a phrase for this. It's called the rise of the nuns, where there's a survey out there and people ask you, what's your religious affiliation? Many more people, especially in the millennial generation, check the box that says none. Mm-hmm. And so consequently, they have moved away from spiritual issues, spiritual concerns. And for those of us who follow Christ, we have hope. And I think that really comes down to being the cornerstone issue that divides people in terms of how they think about the world.
Well, I would also say too, David, Christianity teaches a reverence for government, understanding that God put people in positions that they are. Romans 13 tells us we're subject to the powers and authority. And so while Christians want change, we do it within the scope of our founding principles and our constitutional boundaries. Whereas I think some of those on the left just want to tear everything down regardless of the foundation.
Anarchy versus order.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a huge confusion in our culture today between liberty and licentiousness. Liberty being morally restrained principles versus licentiousness, which is anarchy, the ability to do whatever you want. And that's not what our founders, they knew that wouldn't work in a free society. So, but let me, as we wrap this up, tell our audience about the work you do and how they can get your copy of your book.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, most of what I do these days is I teach political science, economics, and statistics for several colleges and universities. My book, The Unraveling of We the People, one can go to www.theunraveling.us. I've got it set up so that you can get a Kindle version of the book. If you want a hard copy of the book, which I happen to have one here, it kind of looks like this. Basically, there's a way to order it from me on PayPal. So they would go to the website and they would click the PayPal icon and go through that process of ordering a hard copy book for me. What I am doing now with this world of Zoom is I also have courses that I've created. One course is called How to Teach Online. I recently had a software company contact me about maybe doing an updated version where I talk about technology tools like Zoom and talk about using their particular software. And so the representative from the country of India, he and I did a conference call just yesterday. And so I'm going to go about looking at that. But I also have other courses. I have one called Think Like Jesus, Lead Like Moses, and another one, Pursuing Your Mission from God, as well as some other things. And so if you check me out, if you go to my website at wisejargon.com, then you'll find out all about those things, or just Google those names of those particular courses, and we'll go from there.
And how can people sign up for your email? You mentioned your Conversations with the Culture. I get that every
Yes.
week or two. How would people get that email?
Well, the best way to do that is go to wisejargon.com/@the-movies. If you go to my homepage, in fact, let me see if I can do that just really quickly. I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint, and then I don't think that I set this up to do this. So essentially, I'm going to see if I can make a little bit of a change. There we go. And so can you see, it's basically it's going to be the internet.
Yep.
Okay. So if you can see that, then other people who might come to this can see it too. So I'm going to wisejargon.com. That's my webpage, waiting for the internet to bring that up. And up in the upper left-hand corner, can you still see this?
Yes.
Okay, so there's what's called At the Movies. And so there's a drop-down box. And so when you get to At the Movies, you scroll down, and essentially there's a little sign-up form that people can use. It's down here at the bottom. You can subscribe. But also, I want people to be aware that I've begun to create anthologies of my past issues. One of them is called Discovering Raising Daniels and Esthers at the Movie, Discovering Courage Like Jeremiah's at the Movies. It's all based around basically discovering truth at the movies. So people can learn about that. And what I think is it's a great set of tools to use for youth groups or young adult study groups.
Yeah, because the culture in movies play a huge role in how our young people think today.
And because we're having this meeting on Zoom, I just had a meeting with a youth pastor a couple of days ago where I talked to him about even being able to do, say, a one-time meeting with his youth group about a given topic. And so that's something that we're talking about. Happy to do that with other church groups as well.
Well, David, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the interview. It's a lot of good information. And again, the book is The Unraveling of We the People by David Lance.
Well, Micah, thanks so much. And you have a blessed day.
You too. Thank you.